Hi, my name is Dr. Catherine Hughes from Crime Psych. I'm a criminal psychologist and I run a business that enables me to bring knowledge and learning to everyone, not just those who are at schools, colleges or universities. And I do this by producing a range of blogs, vlogs and free online courses. I also run some slightly more in-depth courses, both online and face-to-face. You don't need any previous qualifications to learn with me, and there are several subjects available. So once you've finished watching this video, why don't head on over to my website to see if you can make it to an event or learn online in your own time. This particular video is looking at Sally Challen. Sally Challen killed her husband Richard by hitting him over the head with a hammer at least 20 times at home. The couple had recently separated and were negotiating getting back together when Challen killed him. This case is very similar to the case I covered last week. Last week I did a video on David Pomfret. Pomfret killed his wife following an argument at their stables. He killed her by hitting her around the back of her head with a crowbar. Because of the extent of her injuries, it was impossible to determine the exact number of blows, but it's thought to be around 30. David Pomfret's wife was abusive and cruel. David had spent 22 years of marriage calming her down, putting up with abuse, insults and tantrums. He even had to teach their daughter how to best handle the mother's behaviour. In fact, at the end of last week's case, I concluded by noting that perhaps if the gender roles were reversed, more people would be sympathetic to somebody who'd suffered years of domestic abuse. I have spoken to many domestic abuse survivors who've said that they've fantasised about killing their abuser. Simply leaving the relationship isn't always a viable option. I can understand a person getting to a point where they can no longer take it anymore and snap. And no, I'm not saying that domestic abuse, being a victim of domestic abuse, is any kind of a reasonable explanation or justification for murder. There are thousands of people who have suffered domestic abuse and don't go on to kill their abusers. If I'm being completely honest, I chose this case this week to highlight how the gender of the victim and the perpetrator can change the outcome. I'll take you through the same journey of thinking as I've taken through the last week. I'm not afraid to admit when I was wrong, and in this case I was. Sally was from an upper middle class family. Her father was in the army and would only accept those of the same social standard, especially for his children to be in a relationship with. Her older brothers say that their father didn't like those who came from the Navy or the RAF and certainly wouldn't have liked somebody from a lesser background. However, their father died suddenly when Sally was 5 years old. Sally Challen's relationship with Richard began when she was just 15 and he was 22. A forensic psychologist noted on a BBC documentary that when you lose a parent as a small child, you have to deal with your surviving parent's guilt, which can be problematic for your mental health. In adolescence, she was looking for a father figure to attach to. I fully agree with the statement made by this psychologist. In fact, I would extend it to include all forms of trauma, which includes the loss of a parent in childhood. However, I need to carefully point out that the existence of trauma isn't the issue. It's the emotional support and security that's evident or not following these traumas. So, at 15 years of age, she meets an older man who's attractive and interested in her. I found myself in that situation. When I was 16, I met my husband-to-be and he was aged 22, and we met during a night out and he was completely infatuated by me, and I quite liked the attention that this older man gave me. Throughout their married life, they had 2 children together, both boys. He'd always been the controlling force in their relationship. However, during a visit to America, Richard flew into a rage about the way one of his male friends hugged and kissed his wife. During that night of the family holiday, he punished his wife by raping her anally. He broke off that friendship and returned home to England. His abusive behaviour continued and he raped her several more times, including anally raping her again. She recalled how he would instruct her to go upstairs and wait for him, meaning she was to go upstairs and wash in preparation for intercourse. She never resisted, however, she didn't need to. Her reluctance was evident with her behaviour. This brought me back to the issue of consent that I covered in September with rape. A woman doesn't need to scream and shout or say no for it to be rape. The absence of a no doesn't mean yes. She was simply too afraid to go against her controlling husband. The relationship broke down further after she discovered that her husband was cheating on her. He'd already showed a great deal of disregard for their relationship after he arranged for a photo shoot with 2 naked models posing with him on the bonnet of his Ferrari. He then had this made into Christmas cards from the pair and sent it out to all their family and friends. I can't even begin to imagine how humiliated she must have felt. The reaction by their friends and family to these cards was a mixture of how bizarre, poor Sally, and oh, that's just Richard for you. Sally Challen found even more evidence of her husband's infidelity with receipts proving that he wasn't where he said that he'd been. According to those who knew him, Richard was fixated with younger women. He lost interest in sex with his wife. Sally desperately wanted Richard to love her as much as she loved him. All this time, Richard knew he was able to control and manipulate his wife, Sally. In 2003, she realised he was never there. He went out for salsa lessons. She went through his pockets and found a receipt showing that he wasn't where he was supposed to be, and also came across some Viagra tablets. Her son said that she was always being told, "You're crazy, Sally. It's all in your mind. How dare you question me? Why are you questioning me?" This, of course, is now called gaslighting. Her son David said that she was always being told, "You're going crazy. It's all in your mind. Who do you think you are questioning me?" She Googled a phone number that he often called from his phone, and it was to a brothel. She followed him, saw him go in, and when he came back out and saw her waiting, he ran away. After that incident, she drank more, she stressed more, she smoked more, she wasn't coping. That brothel was eventually raided, and people stopped associating with them as a couple. People would turn down invites to go out with them. Friends said that was when it got as bad as it had ever done. Sally phoned the police to say that she had information about the brothel that had been raided because her husband had used them. The call handler asked her, was he there? And she said, no, he's dead. She said, I'm a stressed wife, please don't push me. Richard came on the phone after that to the police and said, it's okay, my wife has just had too much to drink. The lady call taker asked had there been any violence, and he said no. The couple did finally split, and Sally's niece, Darla, said on the BBC documentary that she'd hacked into his emails and asked neighbours who he'd been at the house with. I suspect that she was stalking him. The couple had separated, but were trying to give their relationship another try. Richard and Sally had moved out into separate homes, and Sally had visited him on the day of his death. During the police interview, Sally admits that I wasn't thinking that I'm going there to kill Richard. I was thinking I'm going there and there's a possibility depending on how it panned out. On the fatal night, Sally had in fact packed a hammer in her handbag with the intention of going to Richard's home to see what happened next. To me, this is clear intention to kill. However, what Richard had done prior to this was only to try and further manipulate his wife. He knew that she adored him and she would do anything to stay in a relationship with him. Sally had agreed to accepting a £200,000 settlement offer on their £1 million home because of the terms that her husband set out as a condition for them getting back together. As I said, on the evening that she killed him, they were living in separate homes. She'd gone over to talk and he'd insisted that she go to the supermarket to buy eggs and bacon. She suspected that he was trying to get her out of the house so that he could speak to a lover on the phone. A friend said that while they were split, that they would have the same conversations over and over again, with her saying, "I think it will be different if I go back this time." She wasn't used to being a woman on her own. She found it difficult to be with him, but she didn't want to be without him. He was going on dinner dates. He came up with this idea of a postnuptial agreement, which only further controlled and manipulated his wife. He sent her an email setting out his return only if his demands were met. He said that she should agree to this £200,000 settlement, even if he decided that they should break up after getting back together. At a murder trial the following year, it also emerged that Sally suspected her husband of being unfaithful, and before she killed him, had discovered the voicemail from a female friend in inviting him out for dinner the following evening. After she killed him, she then drove to Beachy Head, where she'd planned to jump to her death. From the cliff top, Sally called her cousin to admit that she'd killed Richard. She repeated the admission to a suicide team and a chaplain who'd been called to help her. It took them 2 hours to talk her down from the edge. It was at this point that the case of David Pomfret and Sally Challen became very different. This becomes no longer an issue of gender discrimination and an issue of controlling and coercive behaviour seeping into issues of mental health. Yes, Sally Challen and David Pomfret were both victims of a controlling and coercive relationship. I'm sure that many of you can empathise with their frustration of being in those sorts of relationship for years, suffering the domestic abuse. They'd both suffered years of coercive and manipulative behaviour. They both got to the breaking point after years of that abuse, and they both finally snapped. If a partner behaves in a cruel and in manipulating ways, it doesn't justify murder. There are thousands of people who escape abusive, controlling and manipulative relationships without harm or harming their abusive partner. Sally Challen's legal team sought out a retrial. Why is the main question that seems to be hanging over this case. Why had an otherwise calm, perfect wife, good mother, brutally kill the husband that she was supposedly devoted to? Why did she do that? Why did she kill him when they were planning to reconcile? Why are the couple's 2 children so supportive of the woman who killed their father? Why would this be all overturned? How could it be all overturned? There was a question of whether she'd simply been consumed by anger. At this point, I need to be clear that the reason that the retrial was sought wasn't simply because that they didn't agree with the outcome and that she was a victim of controlling or coercive behaviour. It was because Sally Challen had begun to show signs of psychosis in prison. Whilst this isn't unusual, those that do have psychotic episodes in prison have a pre-existing mental health issue. She was assessed by 2 psychiatrists and was diagnosed as having a dependent personality and mood disorder. The controlling and coercive behaviour made that condition worse, to the point where she was suffering from diminished responsibility when she killed him. During Sally's appeal, retired forensic social worker Professor Stark was called to give his expert opinion. He said that, in its extreme, coercive control creates a hostage-like feeling of entrapment, similar to being a prisoner of war. Stark also told the court that homicide is the ultimate risk of coercive control. And this would mean that Sally's attack on Richard wasn't a result of jealousy over the latest signs of Richard's infidelity, but as a consequence of decades of psychological manipulation and domestic abuse that would have left Sally feeling trapped and unable to escape unless by suicide or murder. Sally Challen and David Pomfret had both been victims of domestic abuse. However, it was the pre-existing psychiatric conditions and her mental health disorders that separates these two cases. Following her appeal, the conviction was changed from murder to manslaughter, and because of the length of time that she'd already served in prison, she was released immediately. In interviews and documentaries, she still gets upset because she lost her husband. If she'd not killed him, they may still be together today. Sally Challen and her 2 sons are working on rebuilding their relationship. Thank you for taking the time to watch this video today. I hope that you've learned something and that you found it interesting. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.